This video is sponsored by Bespoke Post. You know what I think is awesome? Receiving top quality items from lesser known brands in a specially made box delivered right to my doorstep. And guess what? There just so happens to be a monthly membership called Bespoke Post that will do just that for you too. Every month, members are introduced to all sorts of cool new products that change month to month, like outdoor gear, kitchen goods, barware, and even live oysters, based off of a preference quiz that you'll fill out. And the quiz is actually pretty accurate. I mean, I was even given this beanie. Turns out, I really like it. I received the switchback box that came with a solar inflatable light, a military-grade compass, a fire starter stone, a utility knife, and a tri-fold camp shovel. And speaking of all this outdoor stuff, I also received the very excellently paired bundled box that came with the beanie that I'm wearing and a scarf and even a money clip. 90% of the products come from small brands, many of which are based right here in the US, such as the Knife and the Terra box, which is made by Bare Bones based in Salt Lake City. Every one of these boxes of awesome has about $70 worth of items in it, but you'll never have to pay that much. It's like magic, quite frankly, and it's free to join, and you always have all of the power to preview the boxes that are assigned to you and either swap them out before they're shipped, or skip a month if you deem it necessary, or cancel altogether at no extra charge. So to get 20% off of your first box of awesome, click the link in the description and enter Bandit20 at checkout, or go to bespokepost.com/bandit20. And now, on to the video. Happy just over 2 years of Elden Ring. If you've been on the channel before, you know we love talking about the deep lore of this amazing game with a specific focus on the unsolved mysteries present around every corner. And if you're new here, welcome. We like to talk about what I just said. Whether you're new here and haven't seen my deep mystery dives before, you've been here for some of them, or maybe you've been here for all of them. Here are all 32 mysteries that we've covered on the channel since the release of the game and the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC for your one-stop shop first-time viewing or maybe refresher if it's been a minute. A couple quick disclaimers for you before starting things off. First off, spoiler alert, which should have been a bit obvious. And second, since this is a bundled video of my already existing videos, you'll probably hear me call out numbers of mysteries that do not accurately reflect their actual number count in the video. Just, ignore that. Now, without further ado, leave a like if you like Elden Ring and a comment down below telling me what your favorite boss is or if you think you've got one of these mysteries solved, and let's begin. Elden Ring was packed so densely with content that here we are, over 2 years later, and we're still figuring things out from the base game even with the massive expansion Shadow of the Erdtree just a few months away. But even though there is plenty of theorizing to be done about who Mesmer the Impaler is and what his backstory could be, and what possible connections he could have to Marika and whether or not he impaled her, we can't forget about the mysteries that we have yet to solve as a community from the base game. One of the biggest of these mysteries that has persisted since day one is that of the fate of the gentle giant known as Iji, Ranni's war counselor and personal friend. As you no doubt know since you've clicked on this video, things don't exactly end well for old Iji, unless of course you consider being burned alive with black flames to be a good time. But since it's been just over 2 years since the game released and lots of people have undoubtedly moved on from the game and its deep pockets of lore and maybe a bit rusty, just so we're all on the same page, allow me to recap Iji's full story so that you can refamiliarize yourself with the character. And hey, you might even learn something new that you hadn't seen or thought of initially. War Counselor Iji is a friendly troll that has two professions. He is the dedicated and skilled blacksmith of the Carian royal family, who apparently employs many trolls in their ranks, some of which we can face in combat in-game. Iji is also the war counselor for Lunar Princess Ranni, the last and only remaining princess of Carian royalty. He claims that he has known Ranni all her life, along with her shadow, Blythe the Half-Wolf, who Iji refers to as Ranni's half-brother when you first meet him, which isn't exactly true. Actually, Iji has a bit of a habit of hiding the truth from people, which we'll see more of in just a bit. We can gather a bit more about his backstory from his old acquaintance, Castellan Jaren, who was once a guest of the Carian royal family, which is where he knew Iji from, who at the time was their blacksmith. It's also most likely where Jaren met the famous and most powerful demigod Star Scourge Radahn, who is the son of Rennala, Queen of the Full Moon, although as you know, Radahn eventually decided to side with his father Radagon and the Golden Order and oppose the Carian royal family by halting the stars in their orbit, which is figuratively and literally connected to the Carian destiny. But that's beside the point. Sorry, Radahn is just one of those characters that's so cool you can't help but talk about him. Jaren also mentions that Iji would always make such dull weapons, which is strange for a blacksmith. But ironically, these dulled weapons that Iji would make were always immune to the decay of the Scarlet Rot, which is very interesting. Scarlet Rot is an all-consuming disease that stems from the ancient outer god of Rot, whose essence has been sealed within the lake of Rot and is no respecter of materials. That stuff will infect anything. Its spread can only be held back by fire, which is what the soldiers of Redmane Castle used to prevent the Rot from taking over their final stronghold. This also means that Iji's weapons must have been imbued with some sort of fire in the smithing process that caused them to be dull, but more on that later. Iji was always involved in Ranni's life, claiming that he knew her and Blythe since they were both children, and even that they would allow him to join in on their playtime. He also refers to himself as Ranni's childhood warden, and because of this, I like to think of his relationship to the both of them as sort of a father figure, since Ranni's father Radagon was absent, I believe, for her entire life, as I personally think that she was the gift that Radagon gave to Rennala when he left her for Marika, the first child of the Rune of the Unborn, which means that Radagon might not have ever met his daughter Ranni. Regardless, because of this, the implications here are that Iji filled that fatherly void, and once Ranni became older and developed her own sense of the world and what she planned to do with it, he stepped away from his duties as the Carian family's blacksmith and became Ranni's war counselor full-time, signifying his true allegiance with Ranni herself. He dedicated all of his wisdom to aiding her in her quest, discarding her flesh and following the dark path of the Empyrean, regardless of what that meant or who she had to betray, and this is what his status was at the time of meeting us, the player Tarnished. Iji and Blythe had spent years going on expeditions trying to find the mysterious underground city known as Nokron, one of the twin Eternal Cities, in order to further the destiny of Lady Ranni. However, even though they found the city physically, they were stumped for who knows how long attempting to actually get into Nokron, which is where you come into the picture, assisting the duo with entering Nokron by talking to either Sorceress Sellen or Castellan Jaren, either of which will give a hint to the fact that Starscreed's Radahn must die in order for the stars to be allowed to move once again, since, you know, he's holding them back, since he's a badass. Which, like I mentioned earlier, is literally what needs to happen for Ranni's destiny to move once again. After Radahn is defeated by you, a star does indeed resume its course and becomes a meteor that crashes into the lands between, opening an entirely new path into Nokron that was previously completely inaccessible. After this, Iji commends you on your massive achievement, you know, defeating the general in combat, and interestingly, comments about the fact that he hopes Jaren will resume his previously promised quest, ridding the family of a, quote, long-standing Carian weed. As a side note, he's referring to the fact that Jaren, who is a renowned swordsman, had promised the Carian family that he would kill the Sorceress Sellen for her betrayal of the family, which you can also help him to do or not do. But anyway, Iji then urges you to descend into Nokron and obtain the precious treasure of the city, not mentioning what that treasure is, and also not mentioning meeting Blythe, which he previously would have absolutely told you to do like he did when you first met. There is a reason for this. Like I mentioned earlier, Iji hides certain truths from certain people. To Blythe, he hid the fact that he was not actually Ranni's half-brother, but rather her shadow, a gift given to her, conjured up by her two fingers when they initially chose her as their Empyrean to replace Queen Marika on behalf of the Greater Will. However, as a creation of the two fingers, Blythe came with pre-programming. If Ranni were to ever resist the will of her two fingers, Blythe would turn from her faithful shadow into a baleful shadow. In other words, he would try to assassinate her. And to you, Iji hid the fact that the treasure of Nokron that he requested you to obtain instead of Blythe is none other than the Fingerslayer Blade, a testament to the hubris of Nokron, and undisputable proof of Ranni's intentions to not only revolt against her two fingers, but to kill them. Since this was clearly a massive sign that Ranni was deciding to revolt, he wanted to get out in front of things and therefore made the decision to lock Blythe away within an Everjail. Specifically, the far-off Forlorn Hound Everjail, which Blythe can be seen at previously attempting to kill the Bloodhound Knight Darrowil, who he claims, interestingly, is a traitor. If you ask Iji about Blythe's whereabouts, he will lie to you and state that Blythe has some other very important task that was given to him and that you shouldn't worry about him anymore. At this point, you can either go and find and free Blythe yourself or wait for him to break out on his own. But if you do decide to free Blythe, who reveals to you in genuine confusion that Iji is the one who trapped him, you can then return to Iji and confront him about this, which will finally force him to reveal to you the truth about Blythe's eventual madness and his belief that Blythe must be neutralized. He gives you one final hint as to how to chase after Ranni and help her complete her questline, which actually involves killing another shadow, another Blythe, and then allowing her to finally kill her own two fingers. And also becoming engaged. But that's beside the point. After this, Ranni disappears until the end of the game, but a bunch of different confusing things happen all at once, which I'll state briefly. Black Knife assassins show up outside Ranni's rise, having been killed by Blythe, who is now aggressive towards you, but still sane enough to declare his undying allegiance to Lady Ranni, after which you put him down, like a rabid dog. Then you can speak with Iji one final time and he delivers some very, very interesting dialogue. He starts by wondering how Blythe escaped from the Everjail, but after that becomes riddled with guilt over the fact that he was wrong about Blythe. The madness could not shake Blythe's love for Ranni. Iji then states that he made a grave misjudgment, shaming himself by pointing out that he thought he was a capable war counselor, and his last words are to Blythe, promising that he would catch up with him in death soon enough, begging for his forgiveness. And when you next see him, he's eerily on his knees, hammer in hand, dead. But it's these final couple details here that make his death the very mystery that it is. He's surrounded by the corpses of 3 additional Black Knife assassins, and he's permanently burning with black flames. So, now that we've recapped everything there is to know about Iji, let's start breaking down the mystery behind this last encounter with him and opening the can of speculation at the same time. In the first place, I think Blythe had completely defied his programming and was 100% sane, standing outside her tower, which he believed she was still in, killing anyone who dared to enter since there were literal assassins approaching the building. And since he was betrayed by his closest friend since childhood and father figure Iji, he didn't know if he could trust you either, and that's why he decided to fight you. Not out of madness, clearly, but out of protection. That has nothing to do with Iji, but I just wanted to put that one out there since I do believe we murdered an innocent man, as does Iji, and more people should feel bad about that. Anyway, most people know about Iji imprisoning Blythe, but I don't think people realize what Iji probably also did to make him this regretful in the end. This definitely feels like he's apologizing for more than just locking him away in a prison for a day. In summary, I think that the Black Knife assassins that were outside Ranni's tower were not actually targeting Ranni, as many people assume, but were there for Blythe. And I think Iji is the one who placed the bounty on Blythe's head. I mean, the assassins show up after Ranni's 2 fingers were killed, right? So it's not like they could order the hit on her, and nobody else is left alive and sane enough in the world to oppose Ranni at this point. And what Iji says right here,
"It pains me so, but he must be neutralized for Lady Ranni's sake,"
really sounds like he wanted Blythe neutralized. Dead, not just imprisoned. And remember, Iji has known Ranni and taken care of her and advised her since she was a child, before she had any aspirations to end the Golden Order and everything as we know it. Which means he was there when she burned her own flesh away. He was there when she stole the fragment of the Rune of Death. He was there for the Night of the Black Knives. And he wasn't just there. Iji is Ranni's war counselor. More than likely, he advised this. So who's to say he isn't the one who ordered the assassins to kill Godwin in the first place, perhaps by some deal or bargain he struck, or at the very least that he knows how to strike a bargain with these Black Knife assassins. And if you think that's overestimating him, remember, he does strangely possess knowledge of ancient and forgotten legends, such as the Treasure of Nokron, as well as having a thorough grasp on the outer gods and how to successfully thwart them. And he spends his days and nights reading and studying. So I think it is very safe to assume that Iji made a bargain with the Black Knife assassins like he may have done before with Godwin, but to kill Blythe this time. And that is why he was so sorry in the end. But then one of 2 things must have happened. Either the deal went bad when Blythe broke out of the Everjail and was no longer the promised easy target to the Black Knife assassins, instead killing several of them, so they in turn went back to Iji, to the one who struck the deal and promised them an easy kill and attacked him. Or Iji may have ordered another hit on himself. But more on that in just a second, because now it's time to tackle this big question, the one I've been building up to this entire time. Who killed Iji? Well, the way I see it, the answer is here somewhere, staring us in the face. But there are 2 possible solutions to this mystery, and you'll have to tell me which one you believe is more believable. The first and most obvious is that the Black Knife assassins who returned to kill Iji simply finished the job, and did just that. Killed Iji. The only reason why this isn't as simple to understand and accept is because EG is burning with black flames. And if this were any other Joe Schmo game out there, I'd say, okay, whatever, they did this kind of because it looks cool. But this is Elden Ring, people. From Software's biggest game of all time, with an attention to detail that makes a Van Gogh portrait look like my drawing of Pikachu. Black flame is specifically god-slaying flame, used by the Godskin Apostles, the source of which is the Gloam-Eyed Queen's Godslayer Great Sword. There have been several updates and patches to the game since release, and none of these have changed the color of EG's ever-burning flames, signifying to me that this is deliberate. Obviously, this is a problem, though, since the Black Knife Assassins use the power of destined death on their blades to kill people, which granted is also a fire, but one that burns black-red instead of black-white. But I think this has a solution. Remember that the god-slaying flame is only a husk of what it used to be. This is told to us several times in the game, and once upon a time the flame was much more potent and could actually kill gods. What changed, you ask? The removal of the Rune of Death. That's right. Before Malekith took the Rune of Death from the Gloam-Eyed Queen and her God-Slayer Greatsword, she used it in order to create the God-slaying black flames. And you can probably see where I'm going with this. What if the black God-slaying flames as we see them today and the flames of the Rune of Death are one and the same, and the black flames are just what they look like when they lose most of their power? Or for instance, after a kill. Think about it, when the Black Knife Assassins who use destined death-empowered daggers killed Godwyn, he was carved with a black curse mark and was filled with black smoke. And when EG was killed, he was burned with black flames. So, possible answer number one is that it was simply the Black Knife Assassins that returned to EG and killed him for their deal going bad. And he was able to kill 3 of them before succumbing to the wounds inflicted by their destined death-empowered daggers. Option 2, on the other hand, is a bit more speculative but much more intriguing. And that is that EG may have killed himself. Like I just said, he was able to kill the assassins that came for him. It's possible that there were more than 3, but clearly he could fend for himself. For this possibility, I'd like to remind you about what Jaren said regarding EG's blacksmithing. Remember that specifically, the weapons EG would smith were always dull, but would never rot from the scarlet rot, implying very strongly that EG could somehow imbue his weapons with fire, which is the only known substance to resist the corruption of rot. It seems like a throwaway detail, but remember, there are no throwaway details in Soulsborne games. So it's possible that EG, who knew he was going to die after we told him about Blythe's death, said this because he was riddled with guilt and decided then that he would end his own life out of shame. And it's also very possible that the flame that he used to forge his old weapons and to kill himself was none other than the god-slaying flame, the flame of destined death. The question is, how did EG get his hands on that particular flame? Well, to state a theory upon a theory, it could be that he is the one who helped to create the source of it, the Godslayer Greatsword, in the first place. Now, this is another theory that I'm not going to go fully into because it's super in-depth and it's not confirmed just yet, but lots of people think that Ranni the Witch could possibly be the infamous Gloam-Eyed Queen, who opposed Queen Marika and was defeated by Malekith. At least back when she was an Empyrean. For several reasons. Her weird eye, her connections to the god-devouring serpent, her desire to revolt against the greater will and overthrow the gods, and of course the fact that she is or was an Empyrean, as was the Gloam-Eyed Queen at one point. Like I said, there's a lot more to that theory both for and against it, so I'm not really going to go into all of that here, but remember that her weapon, the Godslayer Greatsword, is said to be the source of the Black Flame, and it is found within the Divine Tower of Caelid, completely unaffected by the Scarlet Rot, and is a completely blunt weapon. There is no edge on it, which is very strange for a sword, and fits with the description of the blunt weapons EG would smith according to Jaren. So, in a nutshell, it's possible that EG was the war counselor and blacksmith of the Gloam-Eyed Queen, who for the purposes of this theory could be Ranni the Witch. But like I said, Ranni being the Dusk-Eyed Queen is an entire other theory that encompasses lore regarding destined death, Melina, and Marika herself, so I'll just leave that where it is for now. If you would like for me to make a video regarding who I believe the Gloam-Eyed Queen is, because I do have several thoughts on the subject, let me know in the comments below. And also let me know who you think delivered EG the Troll's fate to him. Was he slain by the Black Knife Assassins who used destined death on him, smoldering his body with black flames and killing him forever? Or did he elect to take his own life, using the black god-slaying flames that he himself had a hand in creating? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and whichever commenters have the most likes on their answers will be regarded as the solution to this original Elden Ring mystery. Anyway, let's start off with some of the more well-known mysteries and work our way to the lesser known, starting with a mystery that players have been asking since day one, and that is, just how large exactly is the world of Elden Ring in its entirety? We know for a fact that there are lands outside the Lands Between, since it's referred to as being across the fog, and we even have some name-dropped lands such as the Land of the Newman or the Land of the Reeds, and plus, the Lands Between is called the Lands Between. Between what? Other lands. We also know that the world of Elden Ring is a planet placed within a star system that has aliens and stuff in it, and that the Lands Between is really just one big island. So the big mystery here is how many other land masses or realms or nations are there on the planet that the Lands Between is on? And do they operate on different lore and mythos like the different worlds of God of War, or do the Lands Between and its Elden Ring govern the entire planet? Maybe exploring the Land of Shadow will shed some light on this mystery. Next, let's talk about another relatively well-known mystery, and that is the Rune of Death. As in, what even is it really, and what's its history? Well, the history that everyone knows at this point is that Queen Marika the Eternal earned the title the Eternal by removing the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring, aka removing death as a concept from the Lands Between. We also know that it has the power to bring back life from death into permanent undeath by way of Deathroot and Ghost Flame, while simultaneously having the power to ultimately kill any being, including gods, by way of the Black Flame. It also has another name, Destined Death, and it was used by another Empyrean called the Gloam-Eyed Queen to war against Marika long ago. Because of its ultimate powers, it was used by Ranni the Witch in the Night of the Black Knives, which led to the murder of Godwyn the Golden, which led to the Shattering, which led to the Tarnished being returned to the Lands Between, which led to the game itself. So clearly, the Rune of Death is just as impactful to the world of Elden Ring as the Elden Ring itself. But similarly to the Elden Ring itself, there's still so much we don't know. Like, why is it that the Rune of Death has another name? And why does a rune have followers and servants? Did the Gloam-Eyed Queen obtain the rune before or after it was separated from the Elden Ring? And if it has servants and followers and is the source of Ghost Flame, which is kept by the Death Birds, whose mother is the Twin Bird, who was an envoy of an unknown outer god, does that mean that Destined Death is that outer god? Or is it just a force of nature? Maybe both. With Shadow of the Erdtree right around the corner and Mesmer's whole thing being very red, very dark flames, much like the flames of the Rune of Death, and with Miyazaki confirming to us that the DLC will tell the story of Marika forging the Golden Order and the Erdtree, which we know had to do directly with the sealing of Destined Death, I'm about 50% sure that we'll be finding out more about Destined Death in the DLC. But then again, it is a Soulsborne game, so chances are that we'll actually have more questions instead of answers. Speaking of outer gods though, just how many outer gods are there anyway? And what exactly are they? Like, what defines an outer god? We know of the existence of at least 4. There's the Greater Will, the outer god of Rot, the Formless Mother, and the god of the ancient Twin Bird, which may or may not be Destined Death, as well as some others that are unconfirmed, like the Dark Moon that Ranni and the Snow Witch possibly served. But it's very possible that there are even more than just these, especially if we consider the fact that the outer gods we know of are each sources of magic. For example, the Greater Will is the source of the Golden Order incantations. The Formless Mother is the source of Blood Flame incantations. The Scarlet Rot incantations, and Destined Death, potentially, the source of Black Flame incantations and Ghost Flame sorceries. So if we reverse engineer this train of logic, then this opens the door to any school of magic potentially having a source, and that source therefore being an outer god. So what about the outer god of glintstone sorceries? Is that the Dark Moon? Or would the Dark Moon be the outer god of gravity magic? What about the flames of the Fell God? I mean, if this is the case, then there are like at least 17 other outer gods that we don't even know about, and maybe even more. But I digress. This is all purely speculative, of course, and ultimately there are still so many questions regarding outer gods and their specific natures and goals. But what about the gods of Elden Ring? And if you're not familiar with the difference between outer gods in Elden Ring, then here's a very brief summary. Outer gods are incomprehensibly powerful Lovecraftian-like outer forces that serve as the ultimate sources of power in the Lands Between. But for whatever reason, they typically need a chosen mortal to act as a vessel for their will and power. And this vessel is indeed then granted the powers of the outer god and subsequently turned immortal and referred to as a god. In the Age of the Erdtree, Erdtree, which is the age that the player tarnished enters and ends in-game, the outer god called the Greater Will is in power, while their chosen vessel, Queen Marika, is the god of the land. We find evidence of another god way up in the floating ruined city called the Crumbling Faramazula. Within Faramazula, there is a secret dragon boss named Placidusax. It is said that in an age before the Erdtree, Placidusax served as Elden Lord to a god that left him and never returned, meaning it definitely wasn't Marika. Placidusax then waited for his god, the god of dragons, to return until he met his end at the hands of the player tarnished. The question is, who was the god of dragons? And what happened to them? And was the outer god that they served the Greater Will, or another one that potentially has the powers of time? I don't know about you, but this is wildly interesting and intriguing and something that I wish was more fleshed out. But unfortunately, this mystery is left wide open as there is nothing else at all on Placidusax's god anywhere in the game. But speaking of Elden Lord though, another mystery is what exactly that title means. We know what makes someone an Elden Lord, of course, being the consort to the god ruler of the lands between, regardless of what species you may or may not be. But what does it mean functionally to be an Elden Lord? What powers over the land does it come with, if any, or are you simply the consort and vessel to carry out your god's will, like their right-hand man thing? What makes it such a coveted and fought-over title to claim that even Marika's own children would fight each other to be her consort? Wait a minute. Furthermore, what is the relationship between the Elden Ring and the Elden Lord? If the Elden Lord title predates the Erdtree and the Golden Order, which came from the Greater Will, which sent the Elden Beast into the lands between, which then became the Elden Ring, then does that mean that the Elden Lord predates the Elden Ring? What does the word Elden even mean? So many questions, so little answers. But let's move on. Have you ever wondered about this guy? You know, the guy that goes,
Join myself and King as remedy. Together we will devour the very god.
yeah, that guy. He's part demigod and part supernatural snake since he let it eat him, and that's precisely the next mystery that I want to talk about. What is the god-devouring serpent? Where did it come from, and why is it able to consume anything and then combine itself on a molecular level with its food? The details we're given in-game do give a hint of a background, if you can call it that, but still leave quite a bit to the imagination. All we know currently is that the god-devouring serpent lived on Mount Gelmir since before Praetor Rykard established the Volcano Manor up there, that it has the aforementioned ability to consume prey and combine its own DNA with it, and that snakes in the lands between are seen as traitors to the Erdtree, either in general or because of the god-devouring serpent, which definitely sounds intriguing, giving a certain new character we'll be getting familiar with in Shadow of the Erdtree, but also tells us what we already know about the blasphemous god-devouring serpent. It's known as a traitor to the Erdtree and therefore considered, you know, blasphemous. In addition to being all-devouring, it's also all-regenerating, as we can see after Rykard's death that the body of the serpent does indeed begin to regrow, before of course being eaten by his consort, Tanith. But how is it able to accomplish any of these supernatural god-like feats? Is the serpent yet another outer god? Perhaps one that manifests itself physically? Or was it just a regular random snake slithering around the place and the combination powers came from Rykard's Great Rune after the Elden Ring was shattered? Something tells me we'll be getting more lore on serpents in general in the DLC though, so fingers crossed. Now let's start getting to the really juicy mysteries. Obviously, one of the most mysterious individuals in the entire mythos of the game is the titular character, Queen Marika herself. When we do eventually see her at the end of the game though, and bring the shards of the Elden Ring back inside the Erdtree, which reforms inside Radagon in a really cool shot, the body of Marika/Radagon, which at this point is being controlled by either Radagon or the Elden Ring itself, animates to life and tries to murder you with a big hammer. Then the Elden Beast, which is the literal goopy form of the Elden Ring, also animates to life and also tries to murder you. After which Marika's broken body can be seen motionless once again, cracked and decaying even worse than before, still with the Elden Ring inside. So the question is, after the credits roll and the Elden Ring is restored, does she actually die? Or does she just kind of pull a Ganondorf and rehydrate so that you can truly be her consort, if you know what I mean? Or is she legitimately dead and now only serves as the flaky enclosure for the Elden Ring? Furthermore, who killed her? Was it the last Elden Lord, Radagon, when he tried to restore the Elden Ring? Was it the Greater Will itself? Was it Patches? We may never know. Continuing the topic of Marika though, as you may recall, the Eternal Queen has had 2 husbands, or consorts if you will. The second is Radagon of the Golden Order, who we talked about just now, who also legitimately is Marika, which is probably the biggest mystery in the game, but her first consort and first Elden Lord under her reign was a man named Godfrey. Now, I called Godfrey a man, but in reality he was actually not a man, he was 100% badass. My point is that Godfrey was one hell of an army general and fighter. He waged many wars, including a massive assault against the fire giants of the north on behalf of his wife, Queen Marika. He also bested a powerful lone hero at Castle Morn, bested the Storm Lord, and fathered the first of the demigod children. Godwyn the Murdered, Godwyn the Golden, the Omen twins Moog and Morgott, and possibly Godefroy the Grafted, but we're not really sure where the hell that guy came from. The thing is, just when everything was going well and he destroyed the last enemy of his wife, the Queen, she removed the grace from his eyes and from all the soldiers in his army, and banished all of them from her lands between, creating the first Tarnished and sentencing them to live and die in the Badlands. Now we know after his banishment, the simp Godfrey became Horolow and then died at some point, and then was given the blessing of grace again, and then was resurrected just like someone else we know, and then came back to the Erdtree to seek an audience with his ex. But the question is, why? Why did Marika do that? Banish Godfrey and his armies just when things were going so well? Why did she create the Tarnished and leave everybody in the dark about her plans? I have no doubt that the answer lies somewhere in the mess of lore behind Radagon being her but not being her, and returning to her after making babies with Renala to instead make babies with himself, with Marika. But ultimately I suppose you could chalk this up to just one of the many questions we all have about Queen Marika and the strange choices she made regarding everything, including things like siding with the greater will and then betraying it. I guess we could just ask Sir Gideon Offenir the All-Knowing, since he's, all-knowing, and is the only character in the entire game that was able to glimpse into the will of Queen Marika, and oh yeah, never mind, we killed him too. Speaking of Gideon though, remember his assistant? The guy who wore the decaying skeleton armor that would always stand there leaning against the wall staring at you like an edgelord and eventually tried to kill you? Ensha was his name. The mystery here isn't necessarily why he tried to make you unalive, although yeah, that is pretty weird, but it's in the armor he wore. It's called the Royal Remains set, and its description reads that the bones, which are gold, belonged to an ancient lord known as the Soulless King, and that king's name, get this, was Ensha. So Ensha is wearing King Ensha's remains. But who's Ensha? The king, that is. Is that his face? Were his bones really gold? Was he really soulless? Who or what was he the king of? Was Ensha even a different person, or is Ensha actually Ensha? So when Ensha's armor describes Ensha, it's talking about Ensha's armor. This is one mystery that I would love to find an answer to, so if anyone knows anything I'm missing, please tell me in the comments below. But speaking of soulless, Ensha actually isn't the only soulless character mentioned in the game. Remember those giant walking bell-ringing mausoleums? Yeah, those. Kinda hard to miss. Remember what they hold inside? Headless corpses extending their arms outward. According to several in-game sources, these headless bodies laid to rest inside these mausoleums are none other than soulless demigods that were born of Queen Marika, who apparently did not want them. I'm not kidding, there's a stranded soul that refers to at least one of them as her unwanted child, or in Japanese as her ugly babies, according to Google Translate. But her children nonetheless, regardless of whether or not they were ugly, which I guess we won't be able to tell since, they don't have heads. This is a huge mystery that the fanbase has almost entirely slept on for the past 2 years. If Marika is the mother, who's the father? Was it Godfrey? Radagon? Somebody else? And if you dive a little bit deeper into the mystery, you'll notice that all of the furniture inside these mausoleums are from the Eternal Cities, which were known for their infamous acts of hubris attempting to create artificial life. So, are they artificial demigods? So many questions. Furthermore, 2 things that are not questionable about these headless demigods are that they are indeed demigods, referred to as such multiple times, and that they are indeed headless. But why? Why are they dead, and in such a specific manner? And furthermore, who killed them? Demigods are immortal, at least in the age of the Erdtree. That's not to say they can't be killed necessarily, but rather that they won't just die on their own, or of old age. And with their heads all missing, it's quite apparent that they didn't die of old age, but were beheaded purposefully. Interestingly, Melanus tells us the words of Marika at certain points in the game, and at one point has this to say about her demigod children.
In Marika's own words, hear me, demigods. My children, beloved, make of thyselves that which ye desire. Be it a lord, be it a god, but should ye fail to become aught at all, ye will be forsaken, amounting only to sacrifices.
So, does this mean that this is why Marika didn't want these children? And that she sacrificed them because they didn't do anything with their lives, or they didn't do what Marika wanted them to do with their lives? And what was the point of the sacrifice? Is it some sort of ritual? To achieve what? And what does it have to do with the Eternal Cities? Again, if anyone knows anything else or has a theory about anything regarding the soulless, headless, possibly sacrificed demigod children of Marika, let me know in the comments below, and who knows, I might just make a theory about it because I think there's a lot here. Shadow of the Erdtree gave us a lot of new stuff. New weapons, new dungeons, new bosses, new romances, and even a new tree. It was basically Christmas, but more than all of this brand new stuff packaged in just a $40 bundle, we were also given tons of new mysteries to try to solve, some of which are proving to be a bit more difficult than others. For those of you who have been fans of FromSoft's Soulsborne games for a while though, you know that a DLC adding more questions than answers is nothing new. So here's my list of the top 10 brand new unsolved mysteries from Shadow of the Erdtree. Anyway, at number 10, starting off with one of the largest mysteries, there's an extremely large dragon carcass located in the southeastern portion of the map. And when I say large, I mean that as in incomprehensibly massive. This dragon is so huge that it's even drawn on the map and can be seen from quite a ways off. And this isn't even the first time we've seen an incredibly large dragon corpse that's essentially just part of the map. The first one is over in Lanedale from the base game and is nearly as big as the new carcass. But even though we do know a bit more about the Lanedale dragon corpse, such as its name, Gransax, and even the reason it was there, we still don't know how exactly it got to be the size that it was. And in the case of this new dead dragon, not only is it a mystery as to just how and why it grew to be this massive, especially since we now know that the oldest dragon of them all is actually Bale, we also don't know its name, much less anything concrete regarding its purpose or lore, just that it's big, it's dead, it's located right by the jagged peak upon which Bale the Dread resides, and it's the location of the Grand Altar of Dragon Communion. It also has a giant hole punched in its chest that more than likely resulted directly in its heart getting scooped out, since after all it is located right by the altar where dragon hearts are consumed in communion. We could speculate all day long about its lore given its Drake appearance and missing heart, and whether or not it was Bale who killed it, or whether or not it's the body of Florisax, the ancient dragon before she transformed, but ultimately this is a mystery that I have a feeling will persist for quite a while. And speaking of dragons, at number 9 we have the curious case regarding Bale the Dread and his history with the Dragon Lord Placidusax. See, there's plenty we actually do know about their shared backstories, such as the fact that Bale is apparently the oldest of all the dragons, and father to the entire low-born race of drakes, which were hated by Placidusax and his ancient dragons and actually hunted down, and used as fodder for Dragon Communion, in order to make human drake warriors stronger in the hopes that they would one day rise up to be able to defeat Bale. Placidusax's loyal servant Florisax even gave up her ancient dragon form to become a humanoid in order to serve as the Dragon Communion priestess and guide the Drake warriors onward toward their ultimate goal of defeating Bale, which she even tries to encourage you to do when you first meet her. The thing is, all of this rivalry started after Bale assaulted Placidusax, resulting in both dragons leaving the fight pretty banged up and missing lots of limbs and even heads. However, we have absolutely no idea why Bale did this in the first place. Lots of fans assume that essentially Big Angry Dragon does Big Angry Dragon things, and Bale must have wanted to kill the Dragon Lord because he didn't want to be ruled or something, which is a fine explanation, but we also have reason to believe that Bale's hatred of Placidusax was at least somewhat warranted beyond simple emotions, since there were actually some ancient dragons that also betrayed the Dragon Lord and joined forces with Bale. What happened to make this dragon-on-dragon war break out? And what, if anything, does it have to do with Placidusax's current current entombment in Farum Azula outside of time, or the god that he once served whose return he's still awaiting to this day? As of the present, I don't think we currently have these answers. Switching gears for number 8, what exactly are the giant stone coffins present all over the place in the southern shore? The majority of them are actually located deep within a fissure that's notably inaccessible before Miquella breaks his great rune that is appropriately called the Stone Coffin Fissure. Now, we do have a few hints as to what is inside them. They appear to be made of a substance called putrescence, as the mass of putrescence sorcery and congealed putrescence crafting items indicate. According to the Remembrance of Putrescence, which drops from the Putrescent Knight boss, this putrescence substance is simply decayed flesh, which makes sense since that's what the word putrid means in real life. It's also stated that the lives kept within the coffins are impure, and the congealed putrescence does kind of resemble the other impure life form we know of from the base game, the Silver Tears, and the coffins do kind of resemble the architecture of the Nox. But that is literally all we know about the stone coffins, period. We don't know who made them, we don't know how they got here, why they're so big or why there are so many, or what, if any, the connection is between their putrescent innards and Silver Tears. I'd be happy with just one of those answers. Number 7 is about the character that we all thought would have a much bigger influence in the DLC than he ended up having, Messmer the Impaler, who serves as essentially the mini-boss of the DLC. And really, we know just about everything there is to know about Messmer's backstory, who his mother is, why he slaughters people mercilessly and burns them at the stake, why he turns into a snake, and even who his little sister is. It's Melina, and we burn them both. But the one question that we don't currently have an answer for is the matter of Messmer's father, as in who is he? Obviously Messmer the demigod has flaming red hair, and the other flaming red-headed demigods are all children of Radagon, who is, you guessed it, a flaming red-headed individual. However, since Messmer is more than likely Marika's first child, this greatly implies that it was before her children she had with Godfrey. And this Who's the Father game we're playing seems to be backed up by the Hornsent Grandam, who straight up throws shade at Marika and calls her a strumpet, which is Old English for, you know, harlot. Messmer also has an affinity for fire, as you may have guessed, and this, added to the visage of the fire furnaces apparently looking like the fell god, as well as the fire giant imagery on the furnace's thighs, places the possibility of Messmer's father being the fell god himself at the forefront. As a reminder, it's also possible that Radagon himself is related to the fire giant somehow. Another possibility is that Marika straight up had a kid with the base serpent itself, which Messmer was cursed with from birth. The only hint we have to this, though, is the very base serpent-looking shed snakeskin located outside Bonnie Village, which is clearly a location that was known as being related to Marika's story. In fact, the statue that we get the O Mother gesture from, which unlocks Marika's home village, is found immediately in front of this snakeskin. And if you're curious about Marika's story in the DLC, check out my previous video covering exactly that. But where's the true answer as to Messmer's lineage? It eludes us still. Speaking of Marika, for number 6, we have to ask yet again what exactly went down in the scene with her approaching and standing inside of the Gate of Divinity. The extremely climactic scene apparently holds the secrets for just about everything. The birth of the Erdtree and Shadow Trees, the creation of the Golden Order, the banishment of the Land of Shadow, and Marika's ascension into godhood, and it all revolves around a seduction and betrayal. There are many mysteries in this scene alone, but to isolate just one for now, I'd like to ask the simple question of what even is the Gate of Divinity anyway? If you've seen my Marika story video, you know that I think there's a stark possibility that this Gate of Divinity is the or a crucible, from which the Hornsent draw much of their powers from, such as the Spiral, and from which the Erdtree evolved. If you'd like a more in-depth look at what exactly a crucible is in the lore of Elden Ring, once again, please feel free to check out my Marika video after you're done here. But ultimately, we just don't know if this is the case. I mean, it doesn't appear to be fully made out of bodies. There just appears to be a bunch of bodies plastered onto it. And I guess the same could be said for the structure of Anir Ilum itself, which appears to be either made of bodies straight up or have bodies plastered onto it. Either way, whatever it is allows for some sort of communication between the Greater Will and an Empyrean who would be a god. So who knows, maybe it's just a pre-existing structure that the Greater Will itself placed here at the beginning of time. For number 5, we're going to switch things up again and talk about something that I know is in the game somewhere that nobody has found yet. And that is an alternate ending regarding the one person we do witness become a god inside the Gate of Divinity, Miquella the Kind himself. If you've watched my Miquella story video, you already know where I'm going with this, but in a nutshell basically, I found in the game's text dump some dialogue from Miquella that is nowhere to be found in the game just yet, which reads as follows. I hereby swear To every living being and every living soul, now comes the age of our Eden, a 1,000-year voyage guided by compassion. Beginning here, love encompasses all. No living thing will be denied, no deed censured. I am ready to embrace the whole of it. Let us go together. Radahn, my promised consort. Most notably, this dialogue is extremely similar to Ranni the Witch's dialogue when she's accepting her new destiny as the god of her new order.
I do solemnly swear to every living being and every living soul, now cometh the age of the stars, 1,000-year voyage under the wisdom of the moon. Here beginneth the chill night that encompasses all, reaching the great beyond, into fear, doubt, and loneliness. Well then, shall we, my fair consort eternal?
So, in my opinion, there must be a hidden Miquella ending somewhere in the game, and I'm assuming it would require for us to not, kill him, which would kind of prevent his takeover of the world. This one's actually kind of a cry for help. To anyone out there who's even remotely curious about this cut dialogue, please try anything. The whole internet would like to know how to choose to assist Miquella with his quest to make the world a gentler place. And if you do find something, be sure to return here and let us know all about it in the comments below. Speaking of Miquella's ending, I'm sure you all know by now that in a drastic plot twist, the likes of which hasn't been seen since Shrek 5 was announced the other day, Miquella apparently chose his half-brother, Radahn, to be his king consort and resurrected him inside the carcass of Mohg, his other brother, in order to fulfill this decision. And take a moment to soak that up if you need to. Trust me, I understand. We even get a cutscene detailing Miquella's request directly to Radahn, presumably. The thing is, we have literally no text anywhere in the game that gives us an idea of what Radahn's response was to this request. We have no idea if he was on board with the idea or against it. To fans like myself, I tend to think that he was against the idea since Malenia took it upon herself to essentially force him into a new body, by way of committing death upon him, but lots of fans also seem to think that Radahn was all for the idea, and this was simply a friendly sparring session because he just likes fighting that ended in a nuke going off. Regardless, we cannot currently know whether or not Radahn consented to his soul being placed in his other brother's body, or why Miquella didn't at least resurrect Leonard, his trusty horse, alongside Radahn, which is the whole reason why Radahn learned gravity magic in the first place. I mean, come on, man. Number 3 is actually a recurring mystery from the base game that makes an even greater impact in the DLC, and that is the giant, burning, overarching question of why the Greater Will has such a tendency to just abandon its people. In the base game, we're told in the intro cutscene to the game that the Greater Will has straight up abandoned the world. Finger Reader Enya states that it has renounced each and every demigod, and the two fingers of Roundtable Hold can't really seem to get a response from the big man upstairs when they really needed one. In the DLC, we actually meet the first of the intergalactic living shooting star enemies that the Greater Will placed on the planet, and her name is Meter, the Mother of Fingers. And she actually is the mother of all the fingers. That's not just a figure of speech. The creepy ones and also the 2 fingers, which are also creepy. She isn't the mother of the 3 fingers though, as far as we can tell, but that's a whole other thing. The thing is, Meter was also abandoned by the Greater Will, as we can see from the Staff of the Great Beyond description, for literally no reason at all that we can deduce, which is surprising, especially since she's referred to as the gleaming daughter of the Greater Will, so her betraying or otherwise not following the Greater Will seems very unlikely. This begs the question of why the Greater Will keeps placing people or entities in power as leaders or messengers and then abandoning them sequentially, and also leads us to ask if the Greater Will has been gone for a really long time, and we've just been going off the whims of the 2 fingers who are guessing at the Greater Will's will this entire time. A mystery to this day. At number 2, we have perhaps the most obvious mystery of them all that everyone kind of forgot to ask, but seriously, what is the Shadow Tree? And I know that Miyazaki himself is really fond of saying stuff like, obviously the Shadow Tree is the shadow of the Erdtree, but like, last I checked, shadows are much flatter. This one looks pretty 3D to me. An entire other tree, in fact. So in the first place, how is that possible? And in the second place, how is the Shadow Tree supposed to be the opposite of the Erdtree and its grace, when the Shadow Tree also extends grace to its denizens, apparently with no difference at all except for just a little bit of a darker tone? For all intents and purposes, it really does appear to function exactly the same as the Erdtree, complete with having remembrances of individuals hewn into it for their rebirths. I guess this can only be answered if we know exactly what Marika did to create the Erdtree and her Golden Order in general, possible, but it's still strange that we've played through the entire DLC and we still know nothing more about the Shadow Tree than we did from its first teaser image. And speaking of the teaser image, that's actually going to be mystery number 1. But before we get to that, let's cover a few honorable mentions real quick. First, what exactly is Saint Trina? We've all known she's Miquella's alter ego for a while now, but ever since the DLC released, we can now also see that she is literally another physical person, a la Marika and Radagon. But in addition to this, she's also not exactly human. She's a plant, or is transforming into a plant. Either way, she's also described as Miquella's love, and upon his casting her aside, ended up making her bleed and resulted in her being one of the only NPCs in the game that actively opposes Miquella's plans. But still, what is she? Next, does the Land of Shadow physically fit inside the lands between? It appears to be more of another extended land entirely rather than an alternate reality of the same lands between, since most if not all of the landmarks are completely different and some of them seemingly extend from their alleged lands between counterparts. However, this is also something we still know absolutely nothing about. Although if this cutscene is ever found that appears to show Miquella healing the Shadow Tree and the shadow curtains above it, which are apparently responsible for hiding the Land of Shadow away from the real world, then maybe we'd get an answer. The final honorable mention is another Miquella mystery, and it has to do with his time before entering the Land of Shadow. See, we never had any indication in the base game that once the shattering took place, Miquella went anywhere, aside from within his Haligtree and then getting stolen away by Mohg and taken to Mohgwyn Palace. However, in the DLC, we meet a former Redmane warrior known as Freya, who apparently was fighting in the swamp of Aeonia and got struck in the face by someone or something that infected her with the Scarlet Rot, meaning this was after Malenia's Scarlet Nuke went off after the Shattering. At this point, she claims that Miquella himself found her where she was abandoned in the swamp in Caelid and healed her face wound by kissing it. So why was Miquella in Caelid at this point, and how is it that he now has healing magic? And if he could reverse the effects of the Scarlet Rot instead of just pausing it, why didn't he do that to his sister? Why then did he have to do any of this godhood quest if he already figured out how to cure his sister? The mysteries abound. At long last, the final mystery is also the most close to home, and it regards Torrent, our trusty steed. Why is Miquella riding him? In the teaser image for the DLC, Miquella is shown famously riding Torrent through the Land of Shadow. This would be less mysterious if this image was of his previous travels or something like that. And I mean, it would even give some credence to the age-old mystery of who Torrent's quote-unquote former owner was that we've been trying to solve since day one. However, we know for a fact that Miquella is running around in the Land of Shadow at the same time that we are. He isn't able to enter the Land of Shadow until Mohg is killed, which Leda alludes to and states multiple times throughout the DLC that he's currently heading to and fro across the land. We also literally witness Miquella break his Great Rune, which ends up in the possession of the Shadow Tree avatar. So we know he was at least up here and traveled all over the place discarding pieces of himself until he ended up here, which as a reminder he could not access until we, the Tarnished, killed Messmer and used his kindling to burn the Sealing Tree. So if Miquella is running around the Land of Shadow at the same time that we are, that heavily implies that this image is taking place at the same time as well. But we have Torrent. So how is this possible? It's a mystery for sure, but I will point out that the Torrent Miquella is shown riding in the image is notably missing a saddle. So could it be that Miquella simply has another spectral steed? Torrent's sibling maybe? Maybe Torrent was one of a twin of spectral steeds that were given to Miquella and Malenia, and the Torrent that we have used to be Malenia's. Who knows? Hey everyone, Bandit here. You know, if you peruse the Elden Ring lore and theory sections of the interwebs for very long, there's one thing you'll find out for sure. Different people have different opinions. People interpret things differently and debate which interpretation feels better, but one thing that nobody debates is the fact that the lore of this game is in and of itself debatable by nature. Listen, don't hate me for saying it, I'm just the messenger. It's true, if you called Elden Ring's story vague or muddled or confusing, you'd be making an understatement. But this does result in all the awesome Elden Ring theorizing going on all the time. That being said though, and being a part of the theory presence on YouTube myself, I've come to the conclusion that there are several characters or concepts or events that are simply left unanswered in the game. There's just no way around it. And it could be that these questions will be answered in the future by way of story DLC or something like that, which is definitely something that FromSoft is known for, but for now, here are the 10 biggest unsolved mysteries from the game. The first one is something you see right off the bat in the game, and that is this dead lady sitting right right here in front of your character when you spawn into the Lands Between for the very first time. The building itself is called the Chapel of Anticipation, but that doesn't really give us any hints as to what's going on here. We can theorize that this poor murdered lady is most likely a finger maiden, but anything more than that is just speculation. We can talk about whether the grafted scion just ahead was the one who killed this lady, or whether or not she was actually your original finger maiden and therefore her death is why you're maidenless, but ultimately every possible detail about her is simply unknown and nowhere to be found yet in the game. Secondly, it is still unanswered as to who really gave you the blessing of grace. Was it Queen Marika or the Greater Will itself? The reason why this is debatable is because we know for a fact that Queen Marika knew the Tarnished would return based on her own dialogue that Melina will dictate to us in the game. But the problem with believing it was Marika outright comes from the timeline. That is to say that Marika knew the Tarnished would return, then Marika banished the Tarnished and removed their grace, then Marika shattered the Elden Ring, then Marika was imprisoned within the Erdtree, then the Shattering War happened, and then the Tarnished were granted blessings of grace once again. As you can see, since Marika was imprisoned well before the Tarnished were granted grace, and since the Greater Will speaks to the Tarnished via the fingers via Enya, it definitely seems like the Greater Will was the only entity capable of offering its own grace to the Tarnished at this time. But this still doesn't change the fact that it was Marika's plan for this to happen all along, and she was still a goddess according to the Greater Will itself, regardless of being imprisoned. So with this question being unconfirmed, we just don't currently know for sure if the Greater Will desperately gave grace to the Tarnished or Marika did according to her own plan. Thirdly, and speaking of Marika and her plans, honestly a lot of her decisions have mysterious motives, but the chief of them all would be the infamous shattering of the Elden Ring, you know, the basis for the entire game. If we're being completely honest, we still do not know for sure why she did it. Ranni claims that it was because she was grieving over the loss of her son, Godwyn, but at the same time we have proof that the Black Knife assassins were connected directly to Marika, implying the whole assassination thing might have been Marika's plan all along, which conflicts with why she would be feeling grief. We also have proof of Marika discussing the ring's shattering with her husband / other self before it happened, meaning it wasn't something she did out of an emotional reflex. It was most likely planned. The problem is we don't know exactly what her plan or motives were, so the shattering of the Elden Ring, the namesake of the entire game, surprisingly remains a mystery. Fourthly, and speaking of Marika's hubby / other self, the huge game-changing twist of fate, wacky storytelling, crazy piece of lore is that Radagon is Marika. And that's confirmed in-game directly several times, non-debatable. But what isn't confirmed is whether or not Radagon was always Marika. We know that at one point they were separate beings, according to Marika's own words, when she tells him directly that he, Radagon, is yet to become her, Marika. Radagon was also off making babies with his first wife, Rennala, the enemy of Marika, by the way, while Marika was waging wars with her first husband, Godfrey. So yeah, we know they were separate, but we don't know if Radagon was a separate being in the first place, or was a creation of Marika from her own essence, since she calls Radagon her other self in the same sentence, before their joining. I personally tend to believe the latter, and go into that theory with much more detail in the Marika Explained video, but I'm not too proud to admit that this isn't confirmed in the least. So yeah, mystery number 4 is that it's not confirmed whether or not Radagon was always Marika or a different individual to begin with, possibly explaining his red hair. Next up is the mystery of what makes an Empyrean an Empyrean, and I can already tell a lot of you are rolling your eyes at this one, but it's true. We've got people, including myself, claiming it must be that an Empyrean is an individual that is pure of god blood, which is why only those born of a, quote, single god in-game are Empyreans, and therefore fit to take the mantle of being the Elden Ring's vessel. But this is far from confirmed, and for proof of that, just look at any post on Reddit or anywhere explaining the nature of an Empyrean, or even my own recent videos. The other possible explanation is that an Empyrean is simply an individual that is chosen by an outer god by way of said outer god's 2 fingers. But of course, that's just speculation. We do know what it means to be an Empyrean, but we're far from having a confirmed answer as to what makes an Empyrean. Number 6 is another highly debated topic, or should I say another highly debated individual, Ranni the Witch. Who is she? How was she born? Why is she an Empyrean? And most importantly, why, oh why, is she so similar to Melina? You're not Finger Maiden with the whole closed tattooed eye thing and the mentions of Torrent and the disappearing out of thin air in blue particle magic. I kid you not, none of these questions are confirmed anywhere in game, except for maybe who she is, since we know she is the daughter of Rennala and Radagon. But even so, we don't actually know how she was born, or what her great rune was supposed to be before she threw it away, or the huge can of worms that is who her teacher, the Snow Witch, was, and whether or not the Snow Witch witch's name was Renna, which is the name that Ranni falsely takes on when you first meet her. So many questions and absolutely no answers. Number 7 is who was the Gloam-Eyed Queen or the Dusk-Eyed Queen, depending on what item description you're reading. Seriously, who was this lady? We can read that she was an Empyrean, which I'm sure is an absolutely crucial piece of information. If only we knew more about what makes an Empyrean, and we know that she had the Rune of Death at one point, but she was defeated by Malekith, and that was it. That's all we've got on her. She seems like an enormously important character to understanding some pretty big pieces of the history of Elden Ring, like the whole separation of destined death from the world, and the spawning of the Golden Order, but we have next to nothing on her except for a handful of item descriptions. She was the leader of the Godskin Apostles and used the Godslayer Greatsword, so clearly she was no friend of the Greater Will or even Queen Marika, since Marika sent her own shadow to kill the Gloam-Eyed Queen, which he did. But did she just disappear after that? Was she absorbed into the Rune of Death? Is she the Rune of Death, aka Destined Death? Is Destined Death Melina? Is the Gloam-Eyed Queen Melina? We just don't know, and hopefully the Dusk-Eyed Queen is one of the characters who will get explored more in future DLC, because damn it, I need answers. Number 8. Who created the Elden Ring? You know, the supernatural relic that governs the lands between and the namesake of the game, Elden Ring. Was it the Greater Will? Since we know they sent the Elden Beast, which is the vassal of the Elden Ring, to the lands between in order to enter into and possess Marika, making her the vessel of the Elden Ring? Or was it another outer god predating the Greater Will? We actually have proof in-game that an Elden Lord existed long before the age of the Erdtree in the form of Fortisax, the ancient dragon. So does this mean that the Elden Ring and therefore the Elden Lords have always existed, even before the current age of the Greater Will? But that would conflict with the fact that Godfrey is said to be the first Elden Lord in the age of the Erdtree. Again, we just don't know. Next up, number 9, hey, we're getting close to the end now, happens at the end of the game, actually. Radagon's whole hostility towards the player Tarnished, when you think about it, is quite strange. Quite strange indeed. I mean, if anything, we are to assume that Radagon is on the same side as Marika, right? I mean, he left his first wife to give Marika children and then became her. But not only does he fight against you, who Marika wanted to return to the lands between, he also takes things a step further and closes off the Erdtree from entry to anyone, which is something that's pretty much confirmed to be Radagon's doing, since his symbol is that crisscross pattern that's shown to be sealing the Erdtree's roots from entry. We can see that pattern associated with him in his statues and in his fight and on his Scarseal and Soreseal talismans. In fact, the pattern is even referred to here as a great rune of the Elden Ring. But if Marika wanted the Tarnished to one day return and battle their way up to the Erdtree and cleanse her body of the Elden Beast controlling her, that means that Marika definitely wanted the Tarnished to enter the roots of the Erdtree. And since we also know that the Greater Will wanted the Tarnished to reforge the Great Runes back into the Elden Ring, which is something told to us via the fingers via Enya, that means that the Greater Will definitely also wanted the Tarnished to approach the Elden Ring inside the Erdtree. So both the Greater Will and Marika wanted the Tarnished to enter, but seemingly out of nowhere, Radagon seals us out and also tries to kill us upon our entry. The question we're left with is why? Radagon is called the Leal Hound of the Golden Order by Marika, and his title is Radagon of the Golden Order, so it's heavily implied that his loyalties lie with the Golden Order, which is to say, the vision of the Greater Will. So his prevention of both Marika's and the Greater Will's plans is pretty mysterious to say the least. My personal opinion is that he found out what Marika's plan really was, you know, probably having the Tarnished rid herself of the Elden Beast and therefore the control of the Greater Will, and disagreed with it, wanting to stop the Tarnished from killing the Elden Beast inside his/her/their body, which would remove the Greater Will's connection to the world. But of course, that's just my theory. The actual answer isn't explained anywhere in-game. Now, before we get to the final and biggest unanswered question of them all, here are a couple honorable mentions because, like I said, this game is full of vague storylines with no beginnings or endings. The first honorable mention is an extremely interesting side character known as Nefeli Lo, Warrior. This barbaric lady is clad in the clothing of a champion, which you can also wear if you start off as the hero class. She's the daughter of Sir Gideon the All-Knowing, but you find out later that she's actually not his blood daughter, but instead was simply adopted by the man following her loss of the guidance of grace. The champion armor that she wears is said to come from a people who followed their chieftain Hora Lo, you know, Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. Gasp! Nefeli Lo? Horelo, daughter without confirmed blood father, father with several confirmed blood children, warrior. I know, the connections seem uncanny, and that's not the end of them either. Nefelilo is also inexplicably summonable for the fight against Godfrey / Horelo, so I definitely think they're connected by at least their clan. But whether or not this actually means that Nefeli's real dad was Horelo, though, is a complete mystery. Unconfirmed. But you knew that, otherwise it wouldn't be in this video. The other honorable mention is, what is with the 3 fingers? I mean, seriously. Is there a significance to the fact that 3 + 2 = 5? Does it mean that each outer god has a different kind of fingers? Is there a 1 finger out there? A 4 fingers? A 5 fingers? A 6 fingers? Who knows, man, who knows? Anyway, at the end of this list, at number 10, the most mysterious mystery of them all is, why was Godwyn killed? If there's one event besides the Shattering of the Ring that was responsible for spawning the events of the game and had its hand in every story path that you can take in-game, it would be the cold-blooded murder of Godwyn the Golden. We have several reasons to believe that Ranni was behind his murder, but we also have several reasons to believe that Marika, his own mother, was behind his murder, but we also have several reasons to believe that the Newman women, aka the Black Knife Assassins, acted independently and murdered him by themselves. But why him? What was so special about the firstborn of the demigods, and who himself was not even an Empyrean, that he had to die to sate some unknown mastermind's plan? And furthermore, why was he killed in the way that he was, with his body being left alive but his soul being erased from existence with the half curse mark carved into him? And then why was he attached to the roots of the Great Tree, which I have recently discovered is not the Erdtree? Who orchestrated his body being used to spread deathroot throughout the land by way of the roots of the Great Tree, and why? Why? Would it be so difficult to give us something, anything in regards to answering anything about Godwyn's death and curse mark? Oh great and noble devs of FromSoft? Once again, all we can do is hope for answers in a future DLC. But for now, that's the end of my list of the top 10 most mysterious unanswered questions in Elden Ring, plus a couple bonuses. What did you think of my list? Do you have the answers to any of these questions, or maybe do you have other questions that you feel need answers in a future DLC? Let me know in the comments below. And also please leave a like below if you enjoyed the video, or at least my efforts into making the video, and subscribe if you haven't already to stick around for all sorts of gaming videos to come. Huge thanks as always to my bandit crew, who make my day every day and are the reason I continue bringing the worlds of video games to your local YouTube screens free of charge. That's all I've got in this one, so as always, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. This is Bandit, looking forward to seeing you next time, and signing out. Peace!